Yep, just started recording, and I'm just gonna start from here. So my name is Kristen Anderson, and I run the Art and Nature Center program. And that used to be just the Art Center programs when we were in Yosemite Village, which is when you were here, the Art Center did not exist.
No, it didn't.
So our art program popped up in the 80s. First year is probably 1982. We're at year 39 right now. So yeah, we've been in existence for a while, but this is part of our outreach during COVID. We decided to do some virtual classes. I work with the Yosemite Conservancy, formerly known as the Yosemite Natural History Association. The Yosemite
I'm a member of that.
Yeah, and the Yosemite Fund. So the Yosemite Fund and the Yosemite Association merged, and now we are Yosemite Conservancy. And so that's kind of like, what were we called when you worked here?
Nothing.
Oh, I don't know.
There wasn't an art center or anything. About the only closest thing to it was Ansel Adams, because he was, around. He was at the hospital a lot because he and Dr. Stern were friends.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it just, and we've gotten, it's on the wall. When I left, they gave me an autographed picture of Half Dome. And anyway, I've got lots of Ansel Adams stuff. That was our art.
That was your art. Yeah. And there's lots of art in the park these days, but our art program focuses on teaching beginners skills. And we run a daily art program for 30 weeks a year from April through October. You can come and take a class Monday through Friday from a volunteer professional artist. So we basically hire volunteers to come teach these daily art classes, and they're $20 a class, plus materials and supplies. Yeah. And we get a pretty high caliber of people who will come and volunteer their time to teach these classes. Anything from watercolor to charcoal drawing, chalk pastels, acrylic painting. We did a mosaics class this year, really tricky during COVID. So yeah, and that's our program. The Yosemite Conservancy as a whole is the nonprofit partner to the park. And we raise money through these programs, donations, and retail sales at the bookstores, at the visitor centers. And we give our profits back to the park in the form of grants to accomplish projects like restoration projects, research projects, educational programs, things like that. So oftentimes, if you make it back to the park in the next few years, you'll see all these signs around the park of a project we're accomplishing, and you'll see our logo right next to the Park Services logo, because we are partners in those projects. And so this is just like one of the programs we run. We do a lot of in-park programming. As the Yosemite Conservancy, we do a lot of educational programming. So Outdoor Adventures does basically kind of like guided services, guided hikes, naturalist strolls, outdoor seminars. You can learn a lot about more like naturalist stuff. And then this is an art program. I'm sitting here at Happy Isles. Back when you were here, this building was probably in its early stages of a nature center.
Yes, it was a nature center.
Yeah, and it's still a nature center, but we also combined it with the art center. Yeah, and so that's just like a little bit of background about me, our program, the Yosemite Conservancy. And now with technology, we're branching out of the Happy Isles area into your living room. It's just the two of us tonight, so I don't think we have to worry so much about keeping ourselves on mute or anything like that. I think we can just ask questions as needed. I start out this class with some skill building, and if there's anything, since you're a painter, if you're like, I already know this, I'm pretty comfortable, we can skip it, or we can just kind of like go through it anyway, just as practice, but I'll just kind of go through what I normally go through.
Okay, you just go right ahead, and it does not hurt for me to read.
Awesome. So I'm just going to start out with, and I'm not sure actually how this applies to oil painting. You'll probably keep hearing me say that. I'm not really sure how oil painting works, but I have like a blank sheet here for my practice. And watercolors, I actually sprayed my palette down with this water bottle. It kind of activates my paints, and I get a little stronger pigment if I do that. I can also just grab my brush and like do little drops on my paint. I do need this paper towel up here, because one thing I like to do is like when I grab paint and then I paint with it, I actually wipe my paint off on my paper towel before I rinse my brush. And that kind of allows me to keep my water cleaner for longer, but we can also take breaks to clean out our water.
Okay.
And so the first thing I go over is the color value, which you're probably aware is the relative lightness or darkness of your color.
Yes.
And in watercolor, I'm sure you're also aware that we achieve that with, like, I think I'm not really sure how you would handle or manage this in oil painting, but in watercolor, we start with this strong color. I just dig in here and I really want to activate my paint. So I really kind of like get in here. And then I always bring it over to one of my little open wells in my palette. And then I can take this dark color straight to my page. This is actually really saturated. This is darker than I would normally go because it's almost not transparent. Watercolor is meant to be transparent and it's supposed to let light through to reflect off of that white paper and give us really nice, beautiful colors. So if I add water to this, I'll add a little bit, kind of a lot of water. I can get a lighter, it gives me more paint, but it also gives me a lighter color. And sometimes if I don't want pooling, I'll actually like dab my brush off before I do my swatch. And that's actually significantly lighter. And I can do it again, just add a little more water. I didn't add as much water that time, so I almost got the same color, but I like to do this exercise because you'll notice that you'll see pooling on the edge of your boxes or your swatches.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so I just like to dry my brush off on my paper towel and then I touch the edge of that and clean it up a bit. It'll soak that up. And like one of my volunteer artists, Steve Curl, calls that the thirsty brush.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you dry your brush off, you create a thirsty brush, and then you soak up any big pooling that you see. I'm going to add a little more water, and I'm just going to keep adding water and creating swatches until I get like almost a clear color, almost a clear, totally transparent color. But I actually noticed that as I'm doing this, as the color gets more transparent, it becomes kind of more attractive on my page. It has more vibrance. It's like letting that light reflect through. This is a really bright blue. I didn't realize I was using phthalo blue. It's just like this super staining bright color. But as my color gets lighter, I feel like I need to dab my brush off a bit more because it starts to, obviously there's more water in my pigment. It's kind of creating these like pooling. Do you have a pan set that you got from the store, or did you squeeze tubes out into a palette?
I have paint that in a tube. I have enough art stuff, paints of every kind, to start a store myself.
Oh, great. Yeah, because you've been painting for 40 years, so.
Yeah,
Adds up.
it does add up. And I thought when I retired, and that was, I retired in 96, that I was going to paint and do all these things. Well, I got involved with volunteer stuff. And anyway, and I'm 85 years old now. And I still think one of these days I'm going to do all this painting. I have enough pictures to saved in my file cabinet that I'm going to paint one day. So I don't know. It just,
It's hard for us, like, it's hard for everyone to find the time to make art because I think as humans, we're kind of programmed to keep busy and to be productive, and
Yes.
um, part of what keeps us like sharp, you know?
And you know, and then I find that I waste, well, I don't know that I'm wasting it. I spend a lot of time on my phone playing word games, and
Yeah, I hear you. Those phones, they're
they're
addictive.
awful.
They've got a lot of our attention. So you can see that I kind of went like real dark here, but then here's like a really great scale. It kind of moves up. And I think that I do a lot of testing in my margins. I actually didn't do a lot in these margins, but you can see I'll be like, oh, is that the color I want? And I tested it, it was really dark. So then I went a little bit lighter. So testing in your margins, like I actually printed this, my sketch out it's like proper size. So when you print a PDF, it'll normally just like adjust to fit the page. But I adjusted my printer so it would print at a 9x6. So this is actually a 9x6 square rectangle.
Okay.
And so then I have this margin on my paper I can play in and test colors, but I also then have a frameable size that's like, I could go to Michael's or some other craft store and buy a frame that is with a mat for really reasonable price that is the proper size. There's someone outside my building yelling right now. And I'll let you like continue with your like color value, going to the lightest value. And then kind of when you reach the lightest value or the end of your page, let me know.
Okay, well, I ended up, can you see it? I don't know.
No, your camera's actually off.
Can you see this?
Let me see if I can change your camera.
Okay, because I only have 6 swatches.
Oopsies. Oh yeah, so on your bottom left of your screen, if you hover over, there's like a little video camera icon. If you click on that, I think it'll turn on your camera if you have one on your computer.
So where it says start video?
Yeah, then I can see you.
Okay.
Oh, there I can, oh.
I am.
Oh,
okay.
There you are, now I can see you. Oh yeah, nice. So you got some pretty quick, like dark to light values there. You added a lot of water really quickly, so you have less of these like steps. But that's something to play with too, like as you're, you could even do it with another color. Because different colors, I find the blue is really hard for me, but then if I try it with like a red, like this, like this is a cadmium red, kind of an orangey color. Ooh, yeah, that's not as, I didn't get as saturated a color with that one. But yeah, each color kind of behaves differently on my page and does different things. Like this one gets light really quickly, I feel like. We're going to use a lot of ultramarine blue in our paintings today. Our painting, ultramarine blue is going to be like in our sky, and it's going to be how we mix our grays and things like that. But
Okay.
I have a hard time doing color value studies. Look how dramatic that was. I didn't do a good job there. Can you see my page okay, or is it too bright?
I sure can. Yeah, it's great.
Great. Yeah. My water's already blue. All right. And I think the next things we'll go over, I'll give you a couple more minutes, but the next things we'll go over are really specific to watercolor. And I think it'll be fun for you to practice since you have experience with oils and some watercolor experience as well. But it's like these, the wet on wet and the wet on dry are really specific to watercolor and important to kind of know. So we can avoid a lot of frustration if we know what's going to happen, if we put our paint on our page when our water is still wet or when our other, like another layer is still wet. If we know how our paint is going to behave. And also I have a flat brush and a round brush. I mostly use my round brush, but there will be occasion to use our flat brush today.
Brushes. I have a set of watercolor brushes.
So it has everything you need. It'll probably have a flat brush, a couple of round brushes, maybe even
Yeah, I have
a few more.
to undo this one.
I'll move on to the next techniques, which are pretty, like the first one, everybody knows this one without even really knowing it, but we're going to do wet on dry technique and wet on wet technique.
Okay.
Wet on dry is the most straightforward. It's what we think of when we think of like applying paint to paper. All it means is that our paint is wet because it's watercolor, it's got water in it, and our page is dry. So I'm putting wet paint on dry paper. And that's what we were doing for our swatches. I can get wet paint on my brush and I'm just kind of swishing it back and forth into this nice gradient here. I actually used a round brush to do this, but I would normally show it in a with a flat brush. But you notice when you apply wet paint to dry paper, it doesn't really spread. It kind of just ends up wherever you paint or wherever you put your brush. I can make really precise lines. And it's kind of fun to play with. Like if I push my brush down hard, I get this thick line. If I keep the tip of my brush really sharp and I don't push down really hard, I get these really thin lines. So wet on dry is like if you want control and precision and you want your paint to stay where you put it. You can make a wash like this. You can kind of just create like I'm gonna use my flat brush now, just so I can make a wash, just kind of, or a gradient. I can just cover my page, just drawing my brush down, and I can cover a whole area. And it's pretty precise. It's gonna stay kind of where it is. But I get this nice even coverage. However, if I don't keep getting new paint and I keep pulling the paint down with my brush and going across, it will get from like dark to light because I'm running out of paint on my brush. Wet on wet, on the other hand, is like the fun stuff, but also the very frustrating stuff for people. I'll spin my page around here. And wet on wet is like, I'm simply going to just take my water, clean water on my brush, and then I'm going to paint it onto my page. I'm just going to paint a rectangle. And it's hard to see where it is because it's clear, right? And for these kinds of things, you want your brush and your water to be relatively clean, so you don't just paint your page with like a murky color or blue in my instant, because I was using so much blue. But it's so warm right now. I don't know if it's warm where you are, if it's dry where you are, but I can see my water drying really quickly. So sometimes like if I look at my paper and I move it around, I can see that there's a sheen on the page. I can see where the water is, but I can also see where it's starting to dry, or I can see where it's starting to pool. So I'm going to actually do another layer of water. I don't want any pooling. Like I don't want any like puddles, but I do want it to be consistent and wet. So then I'm going to come in and I'm going to grab my blue paint here. And you notice when I add my paint to this wet spot, see how soft those lines are?
Mm-hmm.
And then I can actually keep pulling this paint down. And I can create like a really nice gradient, light to dark. Or I can create nice sky, because skies, you don't want a lot of streaks in your sky. If you're doing dry, wet on dry, you'll have more streaks. But you'll get softer lines and you won't get as many streaks when you're using wet on wet. And then sometimes I actually move my page around to kind of move it.
Okay.
One thing that we're going to do today is we're going to do a cloud.
Because that's what I was concerned about. Cloud, I love skies.
Oh, me
And
too.
with oils, you have liquid that you mix with your white paint.
Yep.
And anyway, I was taught to use my fingers as to do the woofy clouds, and then you take a brush and soft brush and streak them. You can get some real dramatic stuff that way.
Yeah.
Do it with watercolor.
Yeah, and watercolor, anything that's white, we're going to use the paper. We're going to use the white of the paper. So I just made another swatch on my paper, just kind of covered it in water. It actually has a blue tinge to it and then I'm going to come over and I'm going to take some blue paint out of my palette and I'm going to drop it in, and we're going to use this technique because you can see it's kind of moving and floating around. We're going to use this technique when we're making our cloud. It leaves soft edges, but I want to leave it white where I want my cloud.
Oh, okay.
And see how like it can move, it can like, but it'll leave like a nice soft zone where your cloud is. And then if I overdo it, if I put too much blue on the page and it's like leaking and moving around, I actually grab my paper towel and then I'm going to blot out where if your paint is still wet and if you're not using a staining color like a phthalo blue, if you're using just like an ultramarine or cerulean blue, you'll be able to like remove some paint off your page. So anything soft like a sky or a cloud or things like that, we're going to use our wet on wet technique. If you don't want
Thank
fine
you.
lines.
I had.
Did you just use your paper towel?
I'm fixing to.
Yeah.
I used paper towel a lot. I figure sometimes I think it's a really good brush.
Oh, I think, yeah, definitely. You can use it as a brush. Use it to like pick up paint.
Paint, yeah. Okay.
I'm going to clean this phthalo blue out of my palette. It's too much. Too much going on there.
What are you going to paint next month? Do you know?
It might be tunnel view. My coworker is putting that one together. So I'm not actually sure what she's going to do. Another way I can use wet on wet is I can push paint around. So I don't know if you can see this, but you see how like the edge of my cloud is still kind of wet. I can see it glistening, or the edge of my sky. And I'm going to do this on my waterfalls. I'm going to like take a wet brush and I'm going to drop some water on the page and I'm going to lead it into this color while it's still wet. I'm going to move that bead of water up this edge. And what I'm doing is I'm softening the edge so it's not like a crisp, sharp edge, but also the water is like leaking into the edge of this wet paint. And it's leaving these little tiny spider lines.
Okay.
So if your paint's still wet, go ahead and, you just want the smallest little bead on the end of your brush, and you can even like adjust it before it starts leaking into the rest of your, if it's too much water, you can get a thirsty brush and then soak up some of it. But we're gonna push that water into that paint and let it move. let it move the wet paint. So an application for this that I'm going to use today, I'm going to do this on the edge of my waterfall because I want my waterfall to be white, because the water is white. It's like all foamy and it's falling and it's white, but there's not a stark line between the rock and the waterfall. And so I don't know if you can see how soft that edge got.
Yes.
And I'll show you an example. It's a pretty extreme example on this painting. You can see the edge of the waterfall. I kind of did it like kind of on the edge there.
Okay, I see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these like little spider veins kind of crawling into the like painting, the paint.
I see that.
Yeah, and sometimes people don't like the way that looks. You don't have to do that. Sometimes it'll leave a little bit of a harsh line, but I kind of like it. It leaves these like fun, soft. You can even use your dry brush. I can keep drying it and keep picking up pigment. That's another way to clear off paint on your page. If your paint's still a little bit wet, go ahead and dry your brush, scrub it onto your page a little, and it'll pick up the pigment. It'll take it right away. It won't take up all of it, but it might lighten your color a bit. That thirsty brush can be like a real great tool.
Okay.
Oh, I gotta drink some water. It's been hot here.
Oh, it has, we have had such unusual weather for us in Texas. Usually Houston, because we're a suburb of Houston. And we're about 40 miles from the Gulf. And summertime here is usually, in the high 90s with the humidity at 100 nearly.
Mhm.
But we have had rain every day. And today hasn't been too bad, but it's hot in the morning, about 90 degrees, and then the thunderstorms start coming.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
You can send some rain our way. We don't have any.
I worry about the West Coast.
Yeah, we definitely have some serious drought going on.
Yeah, I have. Okay, this is what I've done.
Let me see what you've got.
I don't know that you can see my cloud.
Oh, it's very light.
It's very light, and then this is the waterfall that I thought, well, okay, I'll just make it coming out of the cloud.
Oh, can you hold it a little higher? Yeah, there we go. Oh, yeah, okay.
I don't know whether you can
That's
see it or
really
not.
wonderful. That's very subtle. It's like a very, those wispy summer clouds that kind of
Yes.
like, almost like a hazy summer cloud. Yeah, that's great. Awesome.
All right.
All right, we've done skies, we've done wet on wet. We've kind of bled into the edge for our like little waterfall action here. How familiar are you with color mixing?
Oh, pretty good. I forget.
Good?
So I just mix till I get what I think looks good.
Yeah.
I know that.
I think like that's a great method. If you have some understanding of how to mix colors, like just kind of, I do the same thing. I'm like, oh, maybe I want a little more blue. Maybe I want a little more red. But we're going to go over kind of mixing grays and some greens, because the greens in your palette can be really vibrant and they don't necessarily look super natural. And then the gray in your palette, if you have one, is kind of flat. Like it's not, I'll actually use my
I don't
gray.
have one. I
Oh,
usually.
great. We're going to mix them anyway.
I usually mix.
Yeah, I have a gray in my palette that this is a rental palette. We usually rent these out to people. And this is what it looks like. It's just like, meh.
Oh, that's awful.
Isn't it awful? It's just so black. And it's kind of a flat color. It doesn't give you a lot of like feeling for the landscape. And Yosemite's rocks aren't really gray all the time. They've got a lot of colors. And so to mix gray today, I'm going to basically just do this the whole time. I have different levels. I'm going to keep it more blue sometimes. I'm going to make it more brown other times. So
Okay.
I take my ultramarine blue. So I kind of take my I think you could use any blue as long as it's not like a fluorescent blue. If it's a nice like a cobalt or a ultramarine or those two would probably be the best actually.
Yeah, I've got them both on my palette.
Nice. I'm gonna whoops, sorry.
Do you ever use Paynes Gray?
I do. I have Paynes Gray. I use it sometimes to darken other colors.
Yeah,
but that's actually what is in my palette. This is a Paynes Gray.
This is Paynes Gray.
This is a Winsor Newton Paynes Gray, so it's not a high, like this is a their student grade. It's the I forget what they call it. The Winsor Newton student grade tubes, the Cotman, I think they call them. And I think it's very flat. It's like almost black. But I know that there's some with Daniel Smith and others that kind of have like a nicer balance. You can tell that they're blue and brown actually mixed together. So I'm going to mix my ultramarine blue. I'm going to clean off my brush. And then I'm going to grab my burnt sienna. It's like an orangey brown. And I'm going to mix that with my blue. And I want to keep it like you can kind of like, since you have a lot of experience mixing color, you can tell my palette has a gray in it and it's really lovely, but it's more on the blue side. So when I paint with it, the colors might separate a little bit, which makes it to me more interesting. But it's like a really nice bluish gray. I can always add a little more brown, make a little darker, maybe a little more on the brown side, or maybe even on the more neutral side. So that's actually almost close to the gray that's in my palette. And then I'm going to add just like a little bit more brown just to see what the brown can do. And just like practice, kind of get like a whole scale. Like when you're mixing your blue and your brown together, you can kind of just start with a bluish color and then keep adding brown, or you can add a little bit of blue to brown and keep going bluer. Just kind of see how many different colors you can get. Because when I look up at Yosemite's walls, like some of these golden grays are really, really beautiful. Like the upper Yosemite Falls wall is kind of sandy almost.
Do you live in the valley or off?
I live in El Portal.
Oh, okay.
Just outside the park on the west entrance. A lot of us do these days. We've kind of outgrown our facilities.
Yeah, when I was there, I don't know whether they still have it or not. They had, of course, I think people like we lived in like a dorm back and it still is, I think.
It's still there.
The nurse that was in charge was so nice because I wanted to go inside the hospital. And anyway, I got a grand tour. And so it really, I mean, it hadn't changed in 60 years.
I know.
Except I told her what the dumbwaiter was because she wanted to know what it was used for. And but we did lots of orthopedics, especially during ski season, and x-rays. I learned how to do x-ray, learned how to do lab. We did it all, the nurses did. There were 7 RNs and we staffed the hospital 24/7.
Wow, that's so different from now. We have like 1 registered nurse, maybe. We have maybe 2, and then we have 1 doctor, 1 PA.
We had 2 doctors in the summertime. They would bring in usually a resident or something like that, for the summer.
Oh,
but Dr. Stern was, if you're looking at the dorm, he lived on the left side, and then Dr. Wintery and his family lived on the right side. And it was a handyman that took care of everything, and he drove the one ambulance. And there were times that Dr. Sturm had to go on horseback to somebody that needed more help than what the Rangers could do before they could transport them. It was an interesting job. I just learned more stuff, and that helped me in my other jobs too.
Nice. You had so much exposure to so many different things.
Oh yeah.
While you're mixing your grays, I'll just go over the greens that are in my palette.
Okay.
I have a sap green, and when I put the sap green on my page, this is a nice like spring color, spring green. You might see some spring maples that are this color. But
I have sap green.
Yeah, that's a nice color right out of the palette. That's really good. But I do often mix it. So to get like a nice realistic color, or something that's a little toned down. For Yosemite, we're a little bit dry, and we have like a little bit of dry golden colors. I do add like a tiny bit of this burnt sienna again to my green. And then I can get like a nice, and kind of balance it. I mix it until I hit like a color I really like. And then I get this nice kind of pine needle green. If I were up close to like a ponderosa pine needle, it's actually, this is more of an army green. Maybe I'd add a little bit more sap green. But yeah, I like to test my colors, see if I like them, add a little more. And that's sap green. I also have a really nice dark phthalo blue or phthalo green. I don't really use this color in Yosemite unless I'm doing shadowy colors, because phthalo green's kind of bluish. I'll show you mine. So if you had something in your palette, like a darker green, you might even have like a pyrroline green. But look at that color. Look at this thing. Got like nice turquoise green.
That's pretty.
It's really beautiful, but often not seen in nature. You know, it's really pretty.
I know.
But
it could be on somebody's clothes.
Yeah. And then you can also just be like, I want to paint abstract and I want to make it this beautiful green.
Okay, so now what colors is that?
This is called a phthalo green. It's like a cool green. It's a bluish green.
Excuse me a minute. I can leave a message. I thought I had that on. Okay.
Yeah, so if you have a bluish green, you could use that, or you could even mix one, a bluish green with your sap green and a blue or something.
Okay, so this color that is so pretty, what, my phone distracted me.
Oh, sorry. It's called phthalo green.
Okay. I don't have that.
And to make this, yeah, phthalo green, if you want to buy it, it's really beautiful. You can mix it with things. Like I'm going to mix it right now with my burnt umber, this like chocolate colored brown. And this is actually what we're going to use for our pine tree later today. It makes this really beautiful, dark, like shadowy green once I've done that.
I have Viridian.
Oh, Viridian. Yeah, Viridian will work.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah.
That'd work.
And I can even add like a little more burnt umber to this. Make it a little bit more shadowy and dark. If you were looking at like a silhouette or something, you might want to go that dark. I'm going to go this dark later today. It's real beautiful. When you're painting with watercolors, of course, you want to go from your largest and lightest areas of your painting to your smallest and darkest areas. So you kind of you just layer. So I can lay down a wash that's really light, and that gives me my like bright lights and my bright values. And then I can add shadows on top of that once it dries. And that is basically all of the skills we're going to use today in Yosemite Falls.
But there's not much water in it right now, is there?
Ooh, Nope. No.
That's sad.
So I'm sharing just like my reference photo here. Well,
I have it taped up in front of on
oh,
my.
do you? Oh, perfect. That's
I do. I printed it out. It's taped up. I'm in a bedroom, so I've got it taped up on the chest of drawers.
nice. I actually feel like I did like an approximation and a simplification just to make things easy. So you'll notice I just did like a little different strategy. I actually have this Sharpie here because I feel like this painting does really well with like completing the painting and then adding a little bit of ink lines in here, just because we're not going to have time to go in and do more layers and more darks. But
That's
I add some defining lines with the Sharpie, but you can also just kind of leave that out and then take your time and just add darker values on top. You can see the shadows and things over here that we started last time.
that was something I was going to ask you about, was using a Sharpie.
Yeah.
Well, I bought a set that's got 4 or 5 different points to it, you know. And when I did, I really struggled with the half dome. But the one that I did outside of class, I really kind of liked it. I didn't make it so dark, and I outlined it with the black Sharpie, and I really like that.
Yeah, it helps create contrast and texture. And like here, my sketch, I already did, I outlined mine in Sharpie. I didn't do the waterfall. I did kind of part of it by accident, but, and I didn't do my cloud in Sharpie because I'd still like those lines to be sharp. But I did kind of, just so you can see my lines, like if I didn't have a Sharpie on this, like it would just, these are actually pencil lines where my waterfall is, but I don't even think you can see my pencil lines. So every class I teach, I do a Sharpie outline, but in this one, once it's dry, I'm going to add some more for texture, just like I did in the other finished pieces.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you're finished up with your grays and greens, let me know, and I'm just gonna dive right into our first step of our painting.
I have, well, I've got puddles, but I don't know whether I'll have enough of. I tend not to make enough paint.
Yes, that's the thing I have trouble with too. So the first color we're gonna use is actually our gray, and we want to mix like a really bluish gray, because that in the foreground here, this rock behind this tree, this is a little bit maybe too blue, but it's our darkest value. It's in the shadow and it's kind of a shadowy color. So I'm going to make a bluish gray and we're going to paint this in first. And go ahead and make a lot of gray because we're going to use that same puddle of gray. We're just going to add more brown to it. And then we're going to do this section. So I might have to keep going back and forth to create more paint or make more paint in my palette, because I have the same problem where I forget to mix a full well of paint, because you don't want to keep just adding water to it because it'll just get lighter and lighter, right? So you want to make sure you have enough to keep that value while you're painting. And so the first color I'm going to mix is I'm going to take this brownish gray that I made and I'm just going to add a bunch of ultramarine blue and water, just because I feel like it got a little dry. And I want it to be a dark value, and I want it to be like a grayish, dark gray. Could be a little bit blue. You can also just do a dark brownish gray if you want. I think I'm gonna go a little browner. Look how dark that is. I'm testing in my margins, which is a good thing to do to kind of know what you're gonna get. I added a tiny bit of brown in here. Yeah, I actually kind of like that. This is a little, but I kind of like the blue. I'm gonna go bluer, actually. I'm changing my mind, going back.
Okay.
I was gonna do a little dark brown, but I just like the blue. I think it just looks really nice. Yeah, there we go. Oh, a tiny bit of water. And I'm adding water because I think I want it to be, I don't want it to be so opaque that it's cakey. I want it to have like a nice transparency to it, but I also want it to have a nice dark value. So I tested it out. I think that's actually kind of nice. I think I'm going to use that color. Often when I paint, I rotate my page to the part I'm working on because I tend to drag my hand a little bit. So I'm going to just rotate my page, and then I'm just going to fill in. I have my tree sketched in here in pencil, but I'm just going to kind of paint right over it. And I'm going to try to move quickly because it's so hot and dry here. I don't want it to dry on my page and leave weird streaks. But I'm also painting at kind of a weird angle. There were some things against me, and I'm going to paint right up to my shrubs. And my shrubs, I'm going to do a little bit of negative painting where I'm just going to like paint around where my trees are. I kind of outline them, so I'm going to try to keep to that outline. I'm just going to fill this in. Wow, you can see it dried so fast. Now I could have done a wet on wet technique with this, but I wanted my paint to stay dark. And if I did a wet on wet technique, it would somewhat lighten my value because there's already water on my page. So hopefully that'll just like even itself out. And I'm also going to paint a tree right over that. So. Oh, you know what?
What?
I skipped a step. I wanted to do the sky first, but this is not a bad place to start. We're gonna still fill this in, and then we're gonna let it dry. While it's drying, we're gonna do the sky because they don't touch each other. It's always nice to like move on to another section of the painting. Like if you do the sky first, then come into the foreground. So that way you're not going to like mix, you're not gonna bleed into the other section with your wet paint. And this does break the rule of like, oh, I'm going to do my largest and lightest and then my like smallest and darkest because I just filled in my darkest area.
That's all right. And with oils, you go from dark to light.
Yeah, as long as we're not like contaminating. I'm going to move to my sky, and I'm going to do wet on wet because I have this cloud outlined here. I'm going to make my whole sky wet with clean water, which is nice because I can't see my water. It's clear, it's clean, it's early in the painting. If I were to do another step, I might have like really contaminated water. And then wherever you put your water is where your paint will bleed. So it's nice to try to be precise if you can on the top of your cliffs. But that's not, I mean, absolutely necessary. But it does give us some boundaries. And it did dry really quickly. So I did this last time. I was like, you know, we're just going to do 2 coats of water. I moved from left to right. And now I'm going to like go back over left to right with some more water because it just dried so fast. And the only reason I covered the whole sky with water is because I want the bleeding effect. So I'm going to take my round brush and I'm just going to grab a little bit of this ultramarine blue. I like to water it down to like a nice sky color. And once you mix your ultramarine blue, make sure you check your sky again and make sure it's still wet. You can always add more water. But I'm going to mix this blue and I'm going to test it out. And I like that color. I think it's like a little dark, but it, you know, watercolors tend to dry.
So you wet the whole, I'm kind of behind you.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Because you're behind me, go ahead and mix your blue first. Mix like a sky blue that you're, the color you want your sky to be. So that way it's ready to apply to the wet paint or the wet sky. When you have your sky blue ready, let me know and then we'll paint.
I do.
Sky. Oh, you do? Oh,
all right. Now then you said you wet the whole sky?
Yeah, I paint the whole sky with water just because I want
Okay.
the paint to move around and bleed into the cloud. So it creates soft edged clouds instead of like really harsh edges. But you could also do like, hey, I really like defined clouds. I really want that to be the thing.
So you don't paint the cloud,
No, I actually do. I paint the whole sky. I cover
the
the
whole
cloud and
sky.
water too. And we're gonna,
Okay.
that's just because I want soft edges, but we're gonna leave the center of that cloud white still. I'll show you. So cover the whole sky in water.
Okay.
We're gonna grab our paint. Now that I have my blue paint ready, I'm actually flipping my page again so I can like cover my sky without dragging my hand. And I'm gonna see how I'm just dropping my paint into the sky. Like it kind of gets soft and oops, I just painted part of my cliff. That's sad. But I'm actually gonna drop this paint onto the edge of the cloud. I'm gonna paint right up to that line I created. And then I'm gonna like allow the paint to kind of drop and spread into parts of the cloud. Because
Oh.
that way I get these like fun, softness. But I have to be careful. I don't really want to fill in the whole cloud with my paint. So I'm just gonna leave it like so. But I do like this soft edge. This is nice. You can see that there's like a little bit of like movement. And sometimes I tilt my page. Just wherever I tilt my page sometimes is where that paint will travel.
That paint will go.
Yeah, it's kind of like ink and water. Like if you just dropped a little bit of ink and water. I'm going to drop a little bit more blue, just like at the top corner here, because I think it would be nice if there was like a little bit of dark. But the rest of my sky. You ever notice on a perfectly blue day, blue sky day, you look up and there just seems to be like the darkest part of your sky is almost like the top of the sky.
Yes.
It gets lighter as it goes down toward your horizon.
I had under the first, teacher, she said you make the top of your sky, the corners darker,
Yeah.
and then bring it down.
Yeah. So I just kind of added a little dark blue in the corner there. Because my initial blue that I mixed was lighter, but it's nice to start lighter so I don't end up having like strange, like I can't undo it if I go too dark right away.
I'm not making mine dark enough.
What did you say?
I'm just muttering. I said, talking to myself, I'm not making it dark enough.
Sometimes if you don't activate your paints with a little water first, it can be like, you almost get like ghosty colors. That's what I call them when I'm working with people outside, because when it's outside, your paint dries so fast. But for instance, like my red paint's pretty dry. So if I just grabbed water and I like touch my paint and then I put it on my page, it comes out as really light. But if I like dig in there for a while and then it comes out really dark.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, activate your paints. And that's why we want to use the palette too. So we can put our dark paint in here and then just add water until we get the color we like. Keep rotating my paper towel.
Do you ever tape your paper down?
When I'm outside, I do. If I'm using a hardboard, or if I'm using a notebook, I might tape the edges so I can keep a crisp line. And it also keeps my one single page from flying around. But when I work indoors, I like to move my page around so much that I don't tape down to the table. But if outdoors you have a whole hardboard it's taped to, you can move the whole board around.
Yeah.
I think some people do less moving around than I do though. I'm definitely a mover and a shaker, just like moving it around.
Well, I took a class, another watercolor class. We ended up doing perspective more than anything. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I wanted to watercolor. But they had us tape it down on a big board. And anyway, well,
How's your sky look? Do you like it?
my cloud, I'm fixing to take some paint out of it if I can.
Yeah. And now my sky is almost dry. I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes to dry because I want to add more. I want to add color to my cloud. So if you look at your reference photo, the clouds aren't just white, right? They've got these beautiful grays inside them, and they've got really beautiful like shadows. The storm.
Well, I have that.
Yeah.
I have that.
So I'm gonna add some gray to my cloud after my blue dries. I'm gonna wet my cloud again after everything dries. And then we're gonna just drop in some shadowy grays. The one thing I will say though is I want to keep, in some of my paintings I do better than others, but I want to keep like some white in my cloud. This one I probably put a lot of gray in on the bottom here, but I tried to leave this edge, oops, sorry. I tried to leave the edge white, but I think I might even leave a little more white this time. So just to kind of like help it pop a little bit. I think my gray kind of took over. But if you notice, like clouds are gray on the bottom.
Yes,
right?
they are.
Or not always, I guess, but often. Mine's pretty dry. I can kind of see that there's not much of a sheen left. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mix my color first. I want to get like a really light gray. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna take my gray from my palette that I just used, and I'm gonna bring it over into another well. I'm gonna just grab, I'm gonna wet it. I'm gonna bring it over here just a tiny bit because I don't want like a dark gray. So wetting it and then bring it into another tray kind of lightens it. And then I'm going to test it in my margins and see, oh, it's really dark. So I might even add some water. Because I'm just going to get it's just like a hint of gray, really, not like a. Mix my color. Let's see. Well, that's nice. It's still a little dark. Maybe I'll do like a tiny bit less. It's almost just going to look like dirty paint water by the time I get the color I want. There we go. Yeah, that's nice because it's really light. And I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to get my clean water, and we're going to do wet on wet again because we want those soft edges, right? But I'm only going to put this clean water where I want the gray paint. So I'm going to leave a little bit of white. Or I'm going to leave a little bit of dry edge. So when I paint my clean water, I'm going to paint it into the sky. But I'm going to like leave a little space between the edge of my water and the edge of my cloud. So I ensure that I leave adequate white space. Make sure your blue is dry before you add water, because if your blue is not dry, it'll spread your blue paint, or your clean water will blossom into your blue paint and it'll leave those. Yeah. So if you paint too close and it's still wet, and then I'm going to take my gray, mix it real nicely so the colors aren't separated. And I'm going to start from the bottom of my cloud, across the top of my waterfall. And I'm just kind of dabbing my brush. And if I have enough paint on there, it'll dab and spread. And then I can move my page around as necessary to get that gray to move around. I'm going to dry my brush a little bit, and then I'm going to like go in with my thirsty brush and make sure that there's no pooling on the edge of my gray. Because if there's pooling, that's like a prime spot for that gray, like the blue and the brown to separate in color, like the colors will separate. Let it move around a bit. You can see how I left like a little bit of a white line there at the top.
Yeah.
And while it's still wet, I'm gonna grab a little bit more of this darker gray, because this is gonna dry really dark or light, because I started with such a light gray color. I'm just gonna take a little bit of this darker gray that's drying in my palette, and I'm gonna just selectively drop it in. It's a little bit too gray, actually. It's a little bit too dark. But it'll make it really stormy today. We had thunderstorms recently. And I put my darkest gray on the bottom of this cloud. And the thunderstorm started, I think something like 19 fires in our in our backcountry. Like, it was a lot of fires started.
I noticed that because I follow all kinds of Yosemite stuff, that they burned some of the underbrush.
Yeah, they did Yosemite Valley. They did some controlled burns, which was really nice to kind of prepare us for, like, it's better to have a controlled burn in Yosemite Valley than a wild burn. That is unexpected. And it's good to keep that. It's good to keep that growth under control in the valley too, so we don't have any surprises.
Well, I have stormy skies.
Oh yeah, hold on. I'll show you mine.
This looks like.
Oh, let me hold on a second.
Much white.
Let me see yours one more time.
Well.
Oh yeah. Oh, I can see. That's beautiful. You have like really soft lines. I love that. And you can see that there's this nice dark line at the top of your cliff, which gives it a lot of contrast. And I think it's really beautiful.
Okay. But now see how heavy I painted that?
Which part?
The dark part right here.
I did the same thing, and it'll definitely, the other parts of the painting will help even it out. I'll show you mine real fast. If you can see, I don't know if you can see. I did some pretty heavy.
Yeah, I have a good view. I have a good view of your picture.
Yeah, it's a little stormy. I have harder lines. You have really nice soft lines. Like, you've really mastered this watercolor thing already.
Oh.
But yeah, I did really dark shadows here too. And I think that's okay, because I've been doing that in my other ones too. And it kind of adds this nice contrast to the painting. And because what we're going to do is we have this gray that we started mixing. But now it's kind of light because I'm adding water to it. So I'm going to mix up my gray again. Remember, we want like a lot of paint in here. And if you notice in this version, I went from like a bluish gray here to then a brownish gray. And then I did a lighter version of it over here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a brownish gray. So I'm going to add more brown than blue, but I still want it to be like a nice dark color. And I'm going to just try to mix a lot of this, because I'd like to use this to fill in both halves of the Yosemite Falls wall, but I might not be able to, just because of the nature of how much paint I'm able to mix in here.
Do you just go the puddle of gray that you have, you just keep adding that?
Yeah, I just keep adding to it. Like, now it's all blue. I mostly added like a bunch of blue to it. And now I'm going to add some brown, and I'm just going to make my gray, as brown as I can, like as brown as I want it. It doesn't have to be. I kind of just like that the upper Yosemite Falls wall feels sandy. I want it to be like this nice brownish gray. And this is a bit dark, so I think I'm going to lighten this up because this is about as dark as I was using for the first section where we were like, whoa, we really used a lot of pigment. So I'm going to back it off a bit with some water. See how dark that is? I'm like, oh yeah, look at that. Actually, that's not so bad. I think I'm going to stick with it, actually. I'm going to roll with the darker brown here, but I kind of want a dark, a medium, and then a light. So the right side of Upper Yosemite Falls is going to be the lightest and brightest, just like in our in our photograph here. Like we got dark, shadowy.
Now you're cutting out.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Uh-huh.
Can you see the photograph?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a dark, shadowy area, we have like a medium area, and then we have our lightest side on the right. So we still want like a nice dark color, but we want it to be transparent still, like these colors here.
Okay.
I might go a little lighter. Let's just add a tiny bit of water. Okay. And now that I have this whole well filled with like a brownish, like a dark brownish gray color, I'm going to take my round brush again. And I'm just going to fill it with as much paint as I can get. And then I'm going to move from the outside in. I want to paint from the outside in because I want the edge of my waterfall to be wet still by the time I want to add those wet on wet technique. You know, I want to get to the waterfall and I want it to be wet so I can drop in what looks like mist or what looks like the waterfall spraying, like we were doing in our wet on wet practice. So now I basically have that. I have painted in my dark gray brown. It's still transparent. I can still see through it. Then when I get to here, my paint's still dry, still wet, but it's not like, surprisingly not super wet. But I'm gonna let it dry like a couple seconds, but I still want it to be wet and I still want it to have a sheen. So when I take this little bead of water, if my brush is too wet, if it has like a bead on the end of it, I actually will like dry it off on my paper towel. Because I just want the tiniest bit of water on the very tip of my brush. And I'm gonna drop it in on the very edge of my waterfall.
Well,
You can see it actually takes a minute. It's like not an instantly gratifying experience where you're like, oh, that's mist. It's like doing its thing. But it takes a second to like activate. You see the edge of my waterfall? It was like, oh, it wasn't gonna do it at first, but now it's starting to like seep in. I actually find I get the best texture on my brush or the best amount of water on my brush when I get it wet and then I just shake it. Like fling off the excess water. And you'll see that it's like a little bit brown in there. So I'm going to scrub some of it out. Like we said, we can get a thirsty brush, dry it off, and I can just scrub some of that out. If your brown paint is starting to spread, you can also just go in with your paper towel. Clean up some edges. I didn't get very many strong blooms. That's what they call it when your paint starts to spread or your water starts to spread into your paint. They call it blooms. I didn't get any real significant blooms. They're just like a little bit of a wavy edge this time. And that's okay. It seems like,
Well, sometimes I think it could add texture to it.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some people don't like blooms and some people do. I think they're fun, but they're not often easily controlled. And for the next one, I think I'm going to leave my paint as is in my palette, because if I add more water to it, it's going to get a lot lighter. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my wet brush and I'm going to do wet on wet. I'm going to just paint water on this upper Yosemite Falls wall on the right side of it. And I'm going to try to avoid my trees a little bit at the base. Do a little negative painting down there. The wet on wet is going to allow my paint to appear like a little bit lighter on my page, but also it's drying in my palette, so I'm going to have to add water, so that's a shame, but that's okay.
Okay, so I'm trying to determine which one is the falls. It's next to the brown, right? Yeah. Okay.
Which one is the falls?
Yeah. I see it now.
So I'm sorry, you're talking about Yosemite Falls?
Yeah, what you're doing now.
Oh yeah, so this is like the upper Yosemite Falls wall, and then
Yeah,
right down
okay.
right down the center here is the Yosemite
Yes.
Falls. And so what I'm going to do is, now that I've already put water on my page, make sure it's real wet. I'm going to paint from the outside in again. I'm going to grab my gray. Actually, you know what? I'm going to have to mix gray because I used too much in the last one. So this is where, but I'm going to get even browner. So if you noticed on, you want like a sandy brown for the top of Yosemite Falls wall. So I'm going to use more brown, like this burnt sienna, and a lot more water. And I'm going to get like a nice sandy color. Make sure that I test it. Maybe a little more brown. I might add a little yellow ochre because it has like a nice yellow to it. Then a sandy straw colored yellow. And I'm kind of like you. I'll just mix until I see a color I really like.
I see what
What'd you say?
I've got to, well, I have to put some more sky in.
Oh.
Because I see this part right here.
Oh, hold on one sec. I'm going to, I can't see it. Now I can. Go ahead.
Okay, it's this part right here. I just didn't do. I was thinking it was part of a rock.
Oh yeah. You'll want to do that first. Let's make sure that gets filled in. I'll wait for you,
Yeah.
and we'll fill in the rest of our rock together.
Okay, sorry about that.
All right. Well, I'm going to get some more water while you're finishing your sky, but that's great because you kind of split your sky into two segments with your cloud.
Okay.
How's that sky coming?
Oh, it's pretty good. I've really kind of messed it up, but
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, it's hard probably to color match, but it's okay if the
yeah.
bottom part's like a little bit darker. I actually added some color to the bottom of mine too, so it's a little darker.
Oh, let me do one more swatch. Okay. Well, it's not too bad. Maybe I'll get the other. Okie doke. I'm ready to do what's next.
All right. Yeah, well, we want to let that sky dry for a minute. Because we're gonna paint that rock right next to it near like where the Lost Arrow Spire would be. And if we just add water, it might bleed into your sky. So we'll give it a couple seconds.
Okay. I'll blow on it.
Yeah. In the meantime, you could mix up like your sandy color. You can do
Yeah,
that.
I have that color.
Oh, you've already got it. And then you discovered your sky.
Yeah, and then it done. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's called getting old.
That's okay, because now we can let it dry. And we can drink water or tea or wine or whatever you have.
Oh, I do have some water.
Oh, it's hard to remember to hydrate when you're like in it, you're like creating.
Mm-hmm. So I noticed also that you were going to do class in September.
Yeah, we're gonna run these through September. And we do it,
Good.
I think you said you took the Half Dome class, right, in
Yes.
June. Yeah, and so next month we'll have, I think it's gonna be tunnel view. And then
Okay.
like a simplified version of tunnel view. And then I'm not sure what September will be. September's still a surprise.
I'll let it be. I did a big oil painting of Tunnel View that hangs over my bed.
Oh, cool.
I'll have to show it to you.
Yeah, take a picture and send it to us. We'd love to see it.
Okay.
Yes. I always tell people to take pictures of your paintings that you do in our class too, and you can email them to us, or you can share them with us somehow. It's fun to see what people do. It's hard to see when someone's like, oh, look at my painting. This is like, but then when someone takes a picture and sends it to you, it's like, oh, wow, that turned out really well. I can really see it.
I saw on Facebook last week that two young women, they were up somewhere up in the high country, and they were painting, and they took them 2 days to do it. They were huge paintings.
Oh,
of the rock.
yeah.
Did you see that?
Where did you see that? On like Facebook or something?
I saw it on Facebook.
Yeah,
It's on the Yosemite.
Were they like big watercolor paintings with like
Yes.
beautiful colors? I think they were actually, one of them, Nikki Frumkin, she's a Seattle artist. She had just taught 2 back-to-back workshops for us. So we have these daily art classes, but we also have these multi-day art retreats. And she taught 2 for us recently. And then she invited her friends who are also artists to come paint with her on her off time. So they made big watercolors. It was really cool.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, they were gorgeous. I just thought, oh, I wish I could do things like that. Not anymore. So that's the
adventure painting
that you have this.
Yeah, this has been fun. We think that we're going to try to do this more next year too.
Well, good. Well, I hope so. It gives me something to look forward to.
Nice.
Okay, I think it's dry. Keenan.
Okay. So the next stage is the wet on wet.
It's fine.
We're gonna take our wet paintbrush, it's clean, and we're gonna paint our Upper Yosemite Falls and Lost Arrow area with water. I'm only using my round brush here because I don't want to rinse my flat brush right now. It's like covered in the brown paint. But it would be quicker to fill this in with.
Okay, now am I gonna leave stuff?
What was that?
Will I leave a place for the water?
Yep.
Will I leave a place for the waterfall?
Yep. Paint everything but the waterfall. So paint your whole Upper Yosemite Falls area. Leave the waterfall dry.
Okay, that's,
Yeah. Once mine's pretty wet and it's ready to go. So what I'm gonna do.
okay, you go ahead. I'll catch up with you. And you're doing it all with the, okay.
I'm gonna use my flat brush to put this paint on. And I'll tell you why, because it's gonna be a gradient and it's going to start from light to, or from dark to light. So I'm gonna get as much paint on my flat brush as I can. And I wanna move pretty quickly before my paper dries. So I'm gonna get all this paint on my brush. And then I'm gonna start from the outside. And I'm just gonna paint straight down. Get as much paint on that first strip as possible. And then I'm gonna come back toward me another strip. And I'm gonna start pulling that paint toward me. And I'm not gonna add more paint to my brush. I'm just gonna let that color get lighter and lighter as I get to the waterfall. So if I keep pulling the paint toward me, it ensures that I'll get this really nice light color by the waterfall, and it's darker out by the Lost Arrow Spire or the Yosemite Point area. See how that looks? So I got it all wet, and then I started just to add the brown, and then I just kept pulling it toward me like you would your sky. Like you said, your friend told you that if you have your sky is darker in the corners at the top and then it gets lighter at the bottom. So it's kind of like that. And that's why I twist my paper so I can pull it toward me. And while it's wet, I can add like a little bit more color if I want it to move around. You can leave like these soft streaks where there's like no harsh lines. It's a way to add shadows that's not super defined. You can just add dark and let it blend in with that wet water.
Now, did you say that the outline, you've already done that with Sharpies?
I did, but you can always add it at the end. I did it just so you could see my sketch. Otherwise, it would be really hard to see. And while the edge of my waterfall is wet, like I did before, we kind of worked toward the waterfall. I can try to drop in some of those blooms with a wet brush. Yeah, so I did my pre-drawing and then I did it with Sharpie so you guys could so people could see it. But then I'm gonna add more Sharpie at the end because it just really makes it pop. Gives you some more like texture. You can add like squiggly lines. I find that when I add water to the edge of the waterfall for that like the bloom or the softness, I have to then dry my brush and soak up parts of it because it gets a little out of control. But I kind of like it. Look at that. That's kind of fun. That's not bad. I also find that when I add water to the edge of the waterfall and I'm pushing it and making those blooms, it pushes the paint out and it creates this dark line next to the waterfall. And I don't know if you remember this, but when you look at Yosemite Falls, there are these water stains on either side that are like,
Yes.
yeah. And so it kind of creates that. It pushes the paint out from the waterfall and creates like a darker, almost like the stain on the watermarks. And you can even try to add that effect. You can try to add like a little bit of darker paint to the edge of your waterfall while it's wet. This is just like me being like, oh, I don't care how it turns out. I paint this every week. And then I'm just going to add a bunch of paint and be like, oh, I don't like that. But I'm a big fan of just trying it anyway, because who knows, it might turn out really well. I might like it. I might add a little gray. Yeah. So I'm always I'm always experimenting. If you notice, I left this little triangle, because in the reference photo, this is even like the lightest little patch. So I actually, you could paint it all as part of the Upper Yosemite Falls wall, but I'm actually going to add water to make a lighter brown, even like an even lighter sandy brown. And then I'm going to paint that one little triangle, this a really light color. Almost like I did when I made the cloud. I just made a gray that's almost barely visible. That's a nice color. I think we can go with that. I think in the reference photo, this section is getting a lot of like sunlight, so it looks white almost. And that's kind of that game of values. So we kind of worked from our lightest value, our darkest value to our lightest, which isn't typical, but the way that the painting's laid out kind of allowed us to do that. Everything I see through when I'm looking at the Zoom screen is actually backward. It's like reversed.
Oh,
So it's very confusing.
Okay, this little thing here, that point, the one that's it's that little triangle-like thing. I heard you talk about it. What are
Mhm.
you gonna? Yeah. Oh,
I
you painted.
basically, I used
You
the
did it.
same color that you used for the big wall, but
Okay.
I add more water to it, so it's lighter. So it's just kind of just a lighter value of the same color.
Oh, okay. Okay.
How you doing?
I'm ready.
Oh, you're ready. Awesome. Well, so now we're gonna paint our shrubs, I call them, like little shrubby trees. Um,
Okay.
because they're kind of the last bit we haven't filled in it. Yeah. Hold on one second.
Sorry. You cut out.
Yeah, so what we're gonna do is we're kind of mixing those greens again, but I
Okay.
think I'm gonna mix a green with like my sap green. And I want it to be bright. I kind of like this. I have my example here. I kind of like the bright green in the front. So I'm gonna grab my sap green and I'm gonna get a lot in my palette. And I'm gonna do like I did the layer here, where I did like a light layer and a dark layer. And I'm gonna go pretty green. I'm not gonna add much brown to this because I like this sap, like spring green. I'm gonna go pretty straight. I'm actually just gonna mix it with what I had already mixed because I do that. I just kind of in your palette, if you just keep mixing stuff, if it's dried up in your
I do
palette,
too.
it can just get absorbed with your new color. Because I already mixed my color, but what I think I'm gonna do this time is I think I'm gonna keep with that wet on wet technique. I'm gonna like apply my dirty water to my tree area. And I'm gonna just kind of, with my round brush, apply it in like little circles. And I'm gonna pretend, because in the photo, the sun is coming. It's kind of like, actually, it's kind of a late day picture. So the sun is coming in from the left side of this image. And that's creating like a shadow on the left side. And then a bright, like the last bit of sunlight's hitting the upper Yosemite Falls wall on the right. But I'm gonna take this bright green. And now that because I wet this whole area, and I'm just gonna take it and I'm gonna like draw little circles and fill it in with my bright green. And I'm gonna leave some white space, probably, not a lot, but I want it to spread through here. But I want the darkest bits to be in the lower left-hand corner. I want there to be some white space to kind of help it sparkle. And then I'm gonna let it dry. But if I want, I can just make sure that dark green just kind of gets saturated in this lower left-hand corner. But I'm not being super precise, and I'm making little circles. And I left a little bit of white space in there. And I'm one of those people that'll just like keep touching a painting. Like, oh, I want a little more green here, a little more green there. And then
Yeah, I do the same thing.
until I'm like, oh my gosh, I've ruined the painting. And it's okay. Like, I'll try not to go overboard with the painting, but kind of like. Yeah, and you can tell my paint's getting dry. And I'm gonna let it dry. We're gonna let it sit for a minute, but I'm not gonna let it totally dry. I'm just gonna let it dry while I'm mixing a slightly darker version. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take that same green I was just mixing, sap green, and I'm gonna add some blue to it. So I can, same blue, I'm gonna keep just adding this ultramarine blue to everything. I kind of realized that ultramarine blue is the color that gets added or mixed into almost all of the painting. And it kind of brings a little bit of like cohesive feeling to the painting because you've got.
Yeah, it does.
All
Somewhere along the line, I've heard that it's good to do that, to use the same with in some way or another during the whole painting. Okay.
Well, now I've got this like bluish, darker green. I'm gonna go in there. It's not quite dry. It's like a little bit wet still. Actually, mine's real wet.
Now, did you put that in the green you already had?
Yeah, I definitely
Okay.
added more sap green so I could keep my paint fresh. I added some sap green and some blue together, and I added it to the same green I was already using until it just creates a nice, almost like a shade. It's like the underside of the leaves, right? It's going to be a little bit bluish. It's going to be a little darker. And I just kind of mix it so there's a pretty big difference. Like if I do a swatch next to my painting here, it's a pretty big difference in greens. And then I'm going to take that darker green and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to apply more of it to this lower left corner, right? Because that's my shady corner. But I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do like little circles and press my brush kind of down on it. And I'm going to create these little circles. And I'm not going to cover all the light green. I'm going to leave some of the light green out. I'm just going to create like little shadows, or it's not even really precise or like, oh, that's definitely a shadow. It's more the representation of like darks and lights and some shadow. I'm gonna do a little bit less of it over here, maybe.
Oops.
Sometimes I like the way this turns out and sometimes I don't. I don't love it today. I'm not loving it, but that's okay. Can't love every painting you do, you know?
No,
It's
that's
against
true.
the laws. It's the laws of art. We can snazz it up with some Sharpie later, but I'm going to stop touching it because that's my sign. When I'm not happy with it, I'll start, oh, I just want to touch it.
I've gotten my dark too dark.
Oh, you can lift some of it out. You can always just
Yeah, that's why I'm blotting it with
paper towels.
paper towel.
Nice. And we have about 9 minutes left, but we can go a little over because we waited for our other person for like 10 minutes, so.
Oh, okay, whatever. It's 8 o'clock here, so I'm not to do.
We have the tree still to go. There's still like a tree in the foreground. It's like a fir tree. And it'll go quickly, but it's like the last, I think it really adds something to the painting just to do like one little tree.
I love to do trees.
Oh, good, good. Some people are really intimidated. I was gonna do a demo of like, this is how I do a tree, but you might already have a system.
Oh, kinda, but I'd like to see yours. I always can learn.
So I'm gonna mix up, while you're working, I'm gonna mix a really dark brown. I'm gonna take that, this is funny, I'm just gonna take this burnt umber, the chocolate brown I have, and I'm gonna mix it with this green that I just used.
Oh, okay.
I'm just gonna grab it, mix it up with this green, and then I have this nice rich brown, but to make it even a little bit darker, I might add a little bit of, you can either add that, what kind of green did you have? It wasn't phthalo green.
Oh, Viridian.
Yeah, oh, yeah, actually mine's a viridian green too. I've lied this whole time. You can add the viridian green or you can and make like a nice dark brown, but I actually kind of, in this instance, just to be quick, I'm gonna grab some of my Paynes Gray.
Oh, Paynes Gray's my favorite color. I use it a lot in oils.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna take the Paynes Gray and I'm gonna like darken my brown with it, make a nice.
It does a good job darkening.
Yeah, yeah. And that tree in the foreground that we were in the example is pretty shadowy. It's pretty dark tree. And this is how I do a tree. I kind of penciled out, I can still see my pencil line where my tree trunk was, but I kind of don't care where it goes. I'm just gonna start from the top where I kind of want my tree to end. And then I'm gonna like make like a line and you can kind of see the trunk. Sometimes you can't see the trunk and I'm gonna make it kind of thick at the bottom where you can kind of see it. Just a tiny bit at the top. I'm gonna dry my brush off. And that was like pretty dark value. Like I was pretty much, I didn't put a lot of water in this, just enough to mix like a really dark color. Because I want that tree to almost be a silhouette, but not quite. And then we're gonna take that viridian green and we're gonna mix another color while that tree trunk is drying a tiny bit. Because mine's
Okay, let me do my tree trunk here.
yeah, mine's pretty wet. Do your tree trunk and we're gonna mix our greens again. Oh yeah, you have the viridian green, so it's the same vibrant color that you really liked earlier. That's good.
Mhm. Well, my tree trunk has character because it's got a crook in it.
Yeah, there you go. No tree is symmetrical, they say.
No, they're not. Okay, so you're mixing Viridian green.
Yeah, I'm mixing the viridian green in. I ended up mixing it with the brown I just used for my tree trunk.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just mix it until it's like a nice dark forest green. I can test it out on my paper up here. Ooh, maybe I need a little more brown. It still looks a little bluish to me. I don't want it to be blue. I want it to be brown or like a nice forest green. Oh, that's nice. And I want it to be dark because I want it to be almost like a tree at sunset. It's like in the shadows, you can still see the color, but you're not gonna notice all of the vibrancy you would during the day. Maybe I'll wave mine around too, make sure it like dries. It doesn't have to dry all the way because I'm not going to disturb the trunk of the tree too much where it matters. And then I'm going to take my green. And then I might dry it off a tiny bit just so it doesn't blot all over my paper. And the way I kind of start my tree out is I start at the top. And then I do like kind of pointillism. I'm just going to add like branches by dabbing my wet brush. It has a lot of paint on it, but I'm going to try to make it so it's not symmetrical necessarily. And it's funny to like try to make your brain not make something symmetrical.
Yeah, that's true.
Some of these branches are going kind of straight out in our photo. Like the fir trees kind of have these like funny branches that kind of go like straight out until they reach toward the bottom, and then they go down, kind of like they like swoop. And I'm just kind of dabbing back and forth. And they get wider as they go down. And it's okay to like leave a bare trunk spot and add a branch down here. Maybe you do a little bit of like, oh, I can cross my trunk. You're like, oh, the branch comes in front of the trunk here. I want these to come out bigger. I might get these like little scraggly things on here. And with this same color green, I just like that we just kind of made our tree with, or making lots of shapes. You can kind of go in and refine it with like a really light touch. If you want to add some squigglies, make the branches come alive with really light, tiny, tiny pressure with your brush. Almost looks like you can see pine needles almost. But I'm going to take that same green I just used. And if you notice on the top of the Yosemite Falls wall in these, in the example, you'll see like little trees. And the way I do little trees from a, like kind of see them from a distance, I'm just going to do it on a piece of paper. I just make like tiny little lines.
Okay.
And so I'm going to do something like that. Maybe not as consistent as that at the top of the falls. I might just add like, make sure I don't put a puddle on my page. Get the very tip of my brush and do like, oh, I want to do like some trees, maybe some tall ones over here. And I'm going to skip a place and maybe do like 3 trees or so here. Maybe 2 trees or so at the top. And I want to space them out a little bit. This is like a little bit more forested at the top over here. Yeah. And I know myself, so I think I have to stop touching mine.
I know, you just keep wanting to add to it and
Yeah, like, oh, no more, put the paintbrush down. Okay. Because then we can let it dry. And most of the parts that we would want to add pen to are dry, like the upper Yosemite Falls wall, the trees are almost dry. So we'll give it like a couple minutes and just like, I won't touch it anymore. We'll let it dry. I'll rinse my brushes so I have no temptation.
Mhm. Have you been to the top of Yosemite Falls?
Yes, I used to be a wilderness ranger before I took this job. I used to hike the trails for work.
Oh, after I've lived in Yosemite, and I've always been interested in the outdoors. My dad he would have made a good mountain man. And I thought if I hadn't been a nurse, I would have been a park naturalist because
Yeah,
that would have been so much fun.
I hear you. It is fun. I really liked being a park ranger. I did evening programs and I um, hiked the trails and I gave information and it was a really fun
Oh,
job.
you just open up a new world for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of people who have been backpacking. There's a mix of people, and I love that there's a bunch of people who have been backpacking here or coming here for years, their whole lives, perhaps. And then
Yeah,
there are people who are new, have never been here, have never been backpacking, or it's really cool.
yeah. Oh my. Well, 60 years ago, we had a sleeping bag and some plastic that we put under it. And that was up to the high country uh, to get away from the tourists and the crowds.
Wow.
But anyway, it was, and the Tioga Road was gravel. And if you met a car coming down, you had to pull over. It was scary. I just,
The Tioga Road
but
was gravel.
it was
Wow.
gravel.
Oh my God.
Have you seen pictures of it back
Yes,
in the day?
it feels so long ago. Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
gravel. I mean, there wasn't room for two cars to pass together.
So how, like, if you came upon someone, you had to like have someone try to pull over?
Yep, they had pullouts, especially around curves. Uh, it was an adventure to get there. Uh, and I had, my roommate had a little Volkswagen and it was easier to drive there. But another one of the nurses that, uh, she and I had worked together in Portland, Oregon. Anyway, she had this great big Buick that it was, anyway, it got us there and back.
Nice. I know cars used to be bigger. Like if you look at those cars, they were bigger. They were made of
Oh,
steel.
yeah, they were big. And
Yeah.
this old Buick, I mean, Shirley was not a very big person. And she was almost had to look underneath the steering wheel to see over it. I don't know. She drove from Nebraska.
Wow.
It was that was really an adventure. I made friends. I started out in Oregon with an ad that was in the American Journal of Nursing when I got out of nursing school in '57. Wanted to see the world other than Texas and Oklahoma. So I went to Portland, Oregon because they would hire me without a personal interview and they had a dorm for me to stay. And I met 6 other nurses that came about the same time. And there were 2 from Missouri, 2 from British Columbia, and 3 from Pennsylvania. And so sharing a house together. And we were working at Multnomah County Hospital, which that in itself is an experience. And after 2 years, we decided three of us decided that we really were tired of working there and we weren't ready to go back to our homeland. So we got out the American Journal of Nursing again and found this advertisement for nurses in Yosemite. And none of us had ever been there. And I'd heard of it. That's about it. So we sent off our applications and Dr. Sturm hired all three of us. And so we went sailing off down to Yosemite in a station wagon and this big Buick. It was, and getting there, but the one, Mary Lou, it was too isolated for her.
Isolated
Yeah,
from
she lasted
Portland,
about,
Oregon.
yeah, and she was from the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. So anyway, she went back to Pennsylvania, but then she stayed there for about 6 months and went back to Oregon. And that was where she spent the rest of her life. But out of this group of nurses that we shared a house with, we started around Robin Letter, and it has been going now for 60 years. But
Wow.
there's only 4 of us left. We have,
So is it a physical letter still, or do you guys email?
no, well, we're right now, we've gone to email because there's just 4 of us.
Yeah.
And it's easier, but no, the physical letters, and I have saved them since, probably the mid 80s. I don't know why I didn't think about doing it earlier. Because we raised our families, much the same time. We have one husband left. And husbands don't last as long as the wife does.
I've heard this. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. My husband has been gone it'll be 10 years in September. So that's why I'm in Texas, because that's where my daughter is with the grandkids who are now grown. But
wow, that's amazing.
yeah, it's
you have quite the legacy. I feel like have you ever seen the show, like, I think it's like Call the Midwife or something? It's on Netflix. It's basically a story of young nurses in London.
no, I haven't.
I think it's in the 50s. Oh, sorry, not nurses, midwives. And
Oh,
nurses.
yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, maybe they were both nurses and midwives. I feel like they were, but I started watching it, and it's basically their story about being midwives and nurses in the 50s.
Yeah, and that's when it's not like it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, it was a stunning show. It was like, glass tubes and things, and you're like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
But your stories remind me of it, this adventure and these young women traveling across the United States to be nurses in random places. It sounds really adventurous, especially for that time, I feel like.
Yes, it was. It was unusual. And I look back now, my mom and dad took me to this little town of Pauls Valley, Oklahoma, which was where the train left, because I rode the train to Portland, and it took me 3 days and 3 nights to get there. And it was, I look back now, I had just had my 21st birthday. And I thought, how did I get the courage to do that? To go off across the country? And I didn't know a soul. But anyway, it was all in God's plan, I think. Well, I know it was. But when I needed to come back to Oklahoma, my brother had a terminal illness, and I've been wandering around for about 3 years out on the West Coast, or 4 years. Dr. Winery, who was one of the doctors there at the hospital, was from Oklahoma, and he was going back home to start his practice. He'd been in the Navy, and he stopped in Yosemite to get some money to start a practice. Anyway, he offered me a job as his office nurse in this town that was about an hour's drive from where my family lived. And I put my stuff on their moving van and got in their car because I didn't have a car. And now you're getting all my life. Anyway, I went to this little town of Sayre, Oklahoma, which is in western Oklahoma, and I'd never been to that part, and it was so barren. And I thought, oh my goodness, here I've gone from Yosemite to this place. But
Oh man, like mountains to like barren plains, right?
yeah, I mean, there are wheat fields, and it has its own beauty if you really look at it. But it was, I really hated to come back home in a way. I did because of my family, but but I ended up moving, ended up, that was in April, and in December, I married the first boy I ever dated because he lived about 45 miles from Sayre, and he came back into my life again. And we were married for 51 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So
That's
now you know my
amazing.
life story.
Your life story is fascinating. I love it. I mean,
Well, thank you.
it's fun to hear other
I've
people's
been-
stories, you know.
Yeah. So where are you from?
I'm from Maine originally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my family's still there. I have a twin brother out there, so I go back frequently to visit my nephews and stuff.
I was in Maine. I did one of these tours. That's what widows do. You travel.
Yes, yeah.
And anyway, we took a tour of the east with the leaves and all in the floor. I was always wanted to go to Maine, and I was really impressed with it.
It's a special place for sure. I miss it a little bit. I sometimes think about going back to, I've been here on the West Coast for 17 years.
Oh,
So
goodness.
it's been a while. Transportation is very different. Like I can just hop on a plane and like it's cheap, and there's like
Yeah.
it's really different than it was back when you were driving a Buick up over Tioga Pass or something. But yeah, so it makes it a little easier for sure to jet around, and it takes like 3 hours or sorry, 6 hours to get home.
Mm.
I still don't love traveling. Like I don't really love like the planes and stuff.
No, I don't like the crowds of people.
Yeah, airports are like, oh, there's so many people. And then you're just sitting so close to all these strangers on a plane.
Yeah. I had when our granddaughter was born, the kids lived in Connecticut, and it was our first grandchild. So I had to go. I flew enough that I got a free thing with Southwest.
Nice. Wow. Yeah.
But I had my last trip was about 3 years ago. We went to there were again a group of widows from church. There were 6 of us, and we went to I think it was North Carolina for a week, and had a cabin on a creek. It was really nice.
Nice.
Last traveling though, it's just too much trouble. I will go with my kids in the car. That's it.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I just to catch you up, I've just been making marks with my pen.
Oh, well, I've been making marks with
Your paintbrush? Oh, hold on. Let me
Paintbrush.
change my view so I can see you better.
Can you see that?
Oh man, your colors are amazing. Look at that. That's beautiful. That's amazing.
Well, Paul, I don't particularly like, but that's okay. I'll do it again.
Yeah, you can cut, you can just do it again. You'll have this video to watch, and you can you have the reference photo. You can try different techniques too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might try to paint it in oil too and see.
Yeah, because that's
Okay.
your medium. You're much more comfortable with that probably.
No, but you really have helped me a lot today, uh, especially with this water, the control of the water
Oh, yeah.
is, anyway, I've got too many trees on the top of the,
I know it's easy to get carried away. You're like, oh, I love this. Because sometimes I get mesmerized by the motion. I'm like making
yes,
trees and it feels fun. And then I'm like, whoa, I made a lot of trees.
yeah, there are a lot of trees and
Yeah.
they're not that many. Anyway, thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank you so much. Join us any other time. You can do the same painting and just keep practicing, or you can join us in August for tunnel view. I think it's
Yeah, I will
yeah.
do that.
Awesome.
And if I were to send you pictures of my paintings, where would I send it to?
Send them to art@yosemite.org.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's your website. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it's like the easiest way. Then like me and Laura can see it because we both
Oh,
answer emails in there.
okie doke.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Ruth.
Okay. I'll see you all in August and in September.
All right, we'll see you next month.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.